I was like a lab specimen. Wheel me out.
Okay, thanks ever so much.
Okay, so yeah, I've been invited here to sort of talk you through my own experiences with autism, growing up and living with it, diagnosis, hopefully provide a bit of sort of context and understanding from a first-person perspective. Specify that I'm on the Asperger's frequency of the autistic spectrum, which is characterised not so much by language difficulties, but a lot more in awkwardness in social skills, particularly in obsessive special interests. Started showing the signs of it quite early on. It was very clear from an early age that my brain was wired in a way that processed information more so than emotions. A lot of my first words were the names of animals, which you might not think would be weird, you know, like cat, dog, fish, bird, but for me it was things like boa constrictor and chameleon and axolotl, and this was like preschool age. So a lot of people thought I was going to turn out to be some kind of child genius because of my ability to absorb and very quickly recall all this information. But much to the chagrin of a lot of my teachers, my ability to absorb and recall information was limited to the things I was already interested in. So yeah, like Asperger's, I'd say it's this intense desire to want to learn about a handful of very specific subjects. Some people it's just one, and they want to learn everything they can about it and talk about it and get really, really excited about it. So when you're like a 3 or 4 year old kid with autism and you've already got an interest in animals and natural history, and then you learn what dinosaurs are, that's it. There's no going back. I've never gone back. Where am I? Yes. Yeah, you find that one topic and it dominates your thought processes. A lot of my first school teachers had a really hard time with me because if it wasn't about dinosaurs, I wasn't interested, I wasn't paying attention, I wasn't listening, I was off in my own little world. And at the slightest provocation, I'd just start and I'd go. You know, I'd just start talking about how the bite force of a Tyrannosaurus is 12,000 pounds per square inch, and there are Triceratops bones that have got bite marks in them from T-Rexes that have shown signs of healing, which means that it brings the theory that T-Rex was a scavenger into question. And the whole time the teacher's going, I just want to know how many sides a pentagon has. So throughout my early school life, I was just reading books about dinosaurs and Ice Age megafauna and all the science that surrounded them. And I wasn't making any efforts to socialise with kids. I wasn't playing with them. I wasn't inviting them to my house. A lot of the time I wouldn't even give them the common courtesy of saying hello. It wasn't an issue that I was being shunned or that I was deliberately receding away from them. It just wasn't occurring to me that going and playing with other children was a thing that I was expected to do. So because I didn't make much effort interacting with kids, I sort of missed out on catching up with another issue with autism, which is developing social skills and understanding emotions. I like to compare it to Mr. Spock from Star Trek, where logic and information comes first and things like emotion and etiquette and empathy come later on. It's not malice or coldness or uncaring, it's just that learning these emotional nuances and understanding them comes a lot harder to autistic kids than it does to neurotypical kids. So with things like traditions, you know, you try to explain, you know, you might say to, you know, a neurotypical child, why do we do this thing? Well, it's tradition, okay. But you try to explain it to an autistic kid and they don't have the context that a tradition is just a thing that you do. You know, what do we do at Easter? Well, we take chocolate eggs and we hide them in a forest. And when you take it out of context of that being a tradition, that's a really weird thing to do. And it's a really difficult thing to explain to an autistic child. I had a habit as a kid of just saying what was on my mind because I didn't have the understanding of things like manners and etiquette and things like that. There was a really bad incident when I was about 6 years old, and we were in assembly, so all the teachers were there, all the children were there, and the head teacher was giving a presentation. I think it was like an Aesop's fable type thing that had a good moral lesson for kids. It was a story about a crocodile, and as part of the visual presentation, she presented a photograph of an alligator. Now, most 6-year-olds either wouldn't know the difference or wouldn't care, but me being the autistic kid with a fanaticism for natural history who doesn't know the meaning of the word inappropriate, I had to intervene. So I corrected her very loudly and uninvited in front of the whole school. And all the teachers, you know, they took me aside later on and said, you can't do that, you can't shout out in the middle of assembly, it's really rude, it's really disruptive, it's really disrespectful. And I didn't get why I was in trouble because she said it was a crocodile and it's a picture of an alligator. I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. It was about this time that the word autism started going around. The pieces all started fitting together. Clearly I had some weird sensory quibbles. didn't like getting my hands dirty. I was always fidgeting. I had this tactile fascination with blue tack. I always need a chunk of blue tack in my hand at all times, squeezing it, stretching it, making shapes out of it. Teachers would put up posters and notice boards around the school, and by the end of the day, they'd all be hanging by the top corners, because I just go around collecting off the bottom corners. I had a fist-sized lump of blue tack that I would just keep in my pocket. There's other behavioural issues like routine and familiarity. Everything had to be set out in a schedule, pre-planned ahead of time, and if anything was even slightly off schedule, all hell breaks loose. Very picky about the kind of foods I'd eat, right down to the branding. Like if the design on the packaging of my food changed, I wouldn't eat it. So I started getting assessed for autism, went through a number of tests and assessments, and it didn't take them long to go, yeah, this kid's definitely autistic. One of the tests they did was a test to see my ability to read and infer emotions. So they had a picture of a bunch of people in a race, and they asked me, what do you think the person at the front is feeling? What do you think the person at the back is feeling? And my observation was that it looked like a diagram of the evolution of man. So it was that thing. So diagnosed autistic, specifically Asperger's syndrome, and from there I was quite lucky. I acknowledge I was very lucky because I got a lot of support and a lot of the resources that I needed. I got personal teaching assistants who would help me understand not just what I was learning, but why I was learning it. I had scheduled group activities with other kids to help me develop my social skills, and I've spent a lot of time in the company of psychologists and mental health experts. A lot of autistic people don't get this, and I don't take for granted how fortunate I was to get the support I need, because a lot of people, they don't get diagnosed that early, they don't get the resources they need, and they slip through the cracks. And that's where, if they don't learn to get a handle on it as a kid, that's where they struggle as an adult. The other thing that's helped with getting a diagnosis so early is that I've spent most of my life being very aware of the condition, how it affects my thought processes and my habits and my behaviour. So by being aware of it, I've been able to sort of sand off the edges. I've cultivated sort of behavioural routines and habits that help me interact more fluidly in a neurotypical world. And they've now become second nature to me. One thing that I do quite a lot is if I know I'm heading for a conversation or entering some kind of social situation, I will plan out what I'm going to say word for word in the structure of a choose your own adventure book. So you read a passage and it says, for option A, go to page 7, for option B, go to page 12. I'll do that with conversations. I'll plan out exactly what I'm going to say, and then I'll anticipate responses and plan out what I'm going to say for this response was, until eventually I've got a spider diagram going off in my head. I can draw different responses depending on how the conversation's going, partly so I can keep conversations going naturally, and also so I don't put my foot in my mouth. Now, it's not saying that I've overcome autism or cured from it, because there's no cure for autism, and nor should there be. It's still a huge contributing factor in my mental environment, and I have to work around it, through it, and with it. I still have the obsessive special interests, like the dinosaurs never left, they never went away. I do have a broader interest in science and natural history, so hence this guy who's got about 4 or 5 different scientific fields weaved into his design. But natural history and paleontology, that's where my heart's at. I'm also a big cinema nerd. I've got shelves upon shelves of DVDs, Blu-rays and VHS tapes in my house through hundreds of titles. And also heavy metal music. I've been a DJ on radio and specialist nightclubs, play guitar, and I have performed on stage to tens of people. I do still have issues with sensory input, still getting my hands dirty, still not fun. I had a very serious incident actually. I'm sure Chris has brought up like sensory overload and meltdowns and things. A couple of years back, my wife and I and a bunch of friends, we went to Scarefest, the Halloween event at Alden Towers, and we went to this zombie maze event. And in my head, I was imagining, okay, it's going to be like a hedge maze with cobwebs and pumpkins, and every now and then someone in a zombie costume is going to go like that. What it was a simulated zombie apocalypse evacuation. So we step through the door, immediately there's hazard lights, sirens, there's soldiers in hazmat outfits screaming at us to move, machine gun fire, and the zombies are charging out of the smoke, grabbing at your arms and legs. And I freaked out. I couldn't handle it, and I had a full-blown breakdown in the middle of this exhibit and had to be rushed out. But as mentioned, I did have friends there, and luckily the staff that were on hand were very understanding. My wife, she's always been really, really supportive and really understanding of it. She was able to communicate it to the staff that were there so that the situation didn't escalate. Socially, I've found my niche. Having really specialised interests, it's good to have people around you that share them. A lot of my close friends and acquaintances are musicians or music fans in the world of heavy metal, as well as like DJs and event organisers. I still struggle to talk to most people. I can't do small talk, like, at all. It's just like, oh, how about the weather? Yeah. There it is. I hate small talk. I want big talk. You know, if someone wants to have a chat with me, I want to talk about, the James Webb Space Telescope that's sending home photos of the furthest reaches of the known universe, but that's a bit heavy for most people. But like I say, thanks to having the resources and information made available to me from quite a young age, I've been able to make, I don't want to say normal life, because it's definitely not, but comfortable and independent. I get quite a few people saying to me, well, if you hadn't told me, I never would have known you were autistic. And then they get to know me for a few days, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm a homeowner, I work full time, I've got a bit of a side gig doing video editing and animation. I've got pets, I've been married for 3 years, and this February I became a father. And my daughter has been a really big challenge for my capacity to command my autism. So having routines and schedules thrown out the door at last minute notice, not wanting to get my hands dirty, it's not easy. My wife and I, we've both had a fairly colourful history with mental health, and we fully imagine that our daughter's probably going to come into her own issues at some point. I'm hoping that by being able to work through my own issues, I can set a good example to her that if she does come into mental health issues, it doesn't have to define her, but that is allowing that the resources and the training and the support necessary are made available to the volume that's necessary. Yeah, I think that's me. I think we're doing a Q&A next. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.